What's up everybody, it's Charles. Today we're going to be replacing the rear wheel bearing on the MK5 GTI. Having a bad or noisy wheel bearing is really not that uncommon at all, and when I went and picked up this MK5 GTI from VIR, I could hear a rumbling coming from that right rear corner. Now, wheel bearing noise can really vary across the spectrum. Anything from a really faint noise only when you load up that one corner to I've had cars where it sounded like there was a helicopter flying around in the trunk at a certain speed only. So really weird things can happen with wheel bearings. This one was a pretty normal failure, and as I was driving, if I would turn the vehicle left a little bit, which loads up the right side, it would get a little louder, and then when I turn the vehicle right, which unloads the right side, it would get a little quieter. So I was really confident in the fact that that right rear wheel bearing was bad. Now, if you want to take it a step further in your diagnosis, which I would in general recommend, we can use something like a stethoscope and spin the wheel while the car is off the ground. It's a little bit more challenging in the back on this car because you have to spin it manually. It's hard to get a consistent speed or really a fast enough rotation. The other thing we can do is use chassis ears and hook that up to the car and actually drive the car and isolate the noise that way. And believe it or not, it's actually not that uncommon to have a car with two bad wheel bearings. One starts to make a little bit of noise, but it's gradual, so maybe you just crank that radio up a little bit louder and don't worry about it. Then by the time you can't crank the radio up anymore, you actually have noise coming from both sides. So if you replace a wheel bearing and you got a noise that sounds like it moved to the other side, you probably had two bad bearings. This job's pretty easy and straightforward. You are going to need a couple of sort of specialty triple squares. As always, I'll link that stuff down in the description, so you just click that link and buy it there on Amazon if you want, or wherever. If you want to get it on the tool truck, that's cool too. But you are going to need a couple of tools that not every single person is going to have in their toolbox. All right, before I start making a ton of really bad wheel bearing puns, let's get rolling. First, let's remove the wheel. Next, what we're going to do is remove this dust cap, and that's going to expose the bolt that holds on the wheel bearing. VW has a special tool for this, but we're going to simply use a chisel and a hammer. And that exposes our triple square behind the cover. Next, we're going to remove the caliper and caliper carrier. This is held on with two bolts behind the brake assembly. This is probably going to be the worst part of this entire job. These bolts are on incredibly tight. In addition to that, space is very limited because of oxidation, and someone having reused the bolts on this car, I had to hammer the triple square bit into the bolt. You do want to make sure that your triple square bit is all the way inside the bolt. If it's not and rounds out that middle portion, it can be a nightmare to try and get out. So please take your time here. Make sure that the bit is all the way in the bolt before you start to loosen them. Once those bolts are off, make sure your parking brake is also off, and we can go ahead and slide our caliper and carrier away from the brake rotor. If you need to, grab a pry tool and just pry it off a little bit. If you're having trouble removing it, you may need to take the caliper off the carrier. But almost every time, you can take it off as an assembly. Now, I'm actually having an issue getting the caliper and carrier off of the brake, probably because the car's been sitting so long and it's so heavily oxidized. We're going to be putting new brakes on it, so this will all come apart anyway. If this happens to you and you get stuck, you do want to address any brake concerns. We need to take the T30 that holds the rotor on. Then what I like to do is thread a wheel bolt in so the brake rotor stays on the car, give it a few whacks with a hammer, and the rotor should come off. If you're reusing the rotor, don't use a metal hammer, use a rubber mallet so you don't damage the rotor. Once it's all loose, we're gonna grab something to set the assembly onto. I just grabbed an old paint can. We'll pull it away. And then we'll set the rotor and caliper assembly on it so that it doesn't hang on the brake line. Now we have our wheel bearing exposed. If we spin it, you can hear just how much noise it's actually making. Also, checking play in and out, side to side, top to bottom is another good idea. Next, we'll take our 17 triple square. The best tool here is a breaker bar. I have a really long ratchet that does a good job for this too. And we go ahead and loosen it. It does state in the repair manual several times not to use an impact on this bolt. Once our bolt is out, we can simply slide our bearing assembly off. And we can see it looks like some of that grease got pretty hot. Before putting our new bearing on, we need to make sure that this is all clean. Any debris on there runs the risk of damaging our new bearing. In our wheel bearing kit, we should have, of course, a new bearing assembly. This is nice because it simply bolts right on. We don't have to mess with anything. This is the ring for the wheel speed sensor, the dust cap, and of course a new bolt. This bolt is torqued to yield and it does need to be replaced. Once you have this portion of the stub axle all cleaned up and free of debris, time to go ahead and put our new bearing on. Take your bearing unit and slide it into place. If you find that it doesn't slide on just as easy as that look, there might be a problem. Pull it back off, make sure there's no debris or anything in the bearing or on that stub shaft. Next, we're gonna put our bolt in. Notice it does have red thread locker on it. They also tell you not to use an impact tightening this. Get your torque wrench. We're gonna torque this to 180 Newton meters or about 133 pound-feet of torque. Our next step in proper torque is to run this bolt around 180 degrees. We can use something like a torque angle wrench or a torque angle gauge, but because this is simply half a turn, what I like to do, put a mark at 12 o'clock and then turn it a half a turn. A breaker bar is gonna work best here. There we go, we've done our half turn. Take our new dust cap. Once you get it started a little bit, you can take a rubber mallet and just tap it on in. There is a special tool to do that. Something else that works well too is a socket that's about the same size as this cap. Now, check this out. Compared to our old bearing, this one hardly makes any noise at all. Now it's time to put our brakes back on. We'll take our whole assembly here, set it on the car, rotate it around so that our screw hole lines up. You can put one wheel bolt in to make that stay a little bit nicer. Put our T30 back in. You really do want to make sure this rotor is seated all the way onto the hub. If it's not, when you bolt the wheel up, it may not torque down properly and you could end up with a loose wheel. Next, we're going to install our new bolts that hold in our caliper carrier. These are torqued to 90 Newton meters plus an additional quarter turn. This can get kind of tricky because the space is limited, so do your best to make sure you get it torqued properly. You'll notice that I did not use new bolts here. I'm actually going to be taking all this back off to do a brake job on the car, so we'll install new bolts when we do the brakes. After those caliper carrier bolts are torqued, go ahead and put the wheel on, torque the wheel down properly, take it for a test drive, and make sure you don't have any more noises. All right, I'm gonna wrap it up there. Hopefully that job went super smooth for you guys. It went pretty easy for me as well, despite the car being all rusted. Big ups to FCP Euro for helping me create this video for you guys, as well as sponsoring the entire Mark 5 project. That car has now moved on to bigger and better things with a whole lot of new parts. As always, links to tools and that wheel bearing are down in the description. Guys, if you have questions or comments about this video, leave them down below. Hit that thumbs up button. Don't forget to share and subscribe to the YouTube channel so you never miss another video coming out. You can follow me and FCP Euro on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Of course, I'll link up FCP Euro's YouTube channel because they do a great job on their YouTube channel as well. Guys, thank you so much for watching. Have an awesome day. Congrats on an awesome repair on your right rear wheel bearing, or if you're doing the left side, hopefully the left went well too. Fronts are very similar, just a little bit different. And the hardest part is just getting those bolts tight. Boy, that's a lot of tight to tighten that bolt. All right, guys, I'm out. Have an awesome day, and I'll talk to you again next time.